Thanks for tuning in to the Medevac podcast, powered by the Robert Irvine Foundation, whose mission is to support and strengthen the physical and mental well-being of our nation's heroes and their families. They provide them with life-changing opportunities, resources, and support through food, wellness, community, and financial programs. I'm one of your hosts, David Reid.
And I'm your other host, Christian Meyers. Thank you for joining us today. If you're new to the Medevac podcast, please keep in mind there's a price for the show. You have to share it with a friend or family member if you get something out of today's episode. So I know you're going to get something out of today's episode because our guest is pretty fantastic. He's got an amazing story. Please welcome Kegan Gill, who also goes by Smurf.
A.K.A. Smurf.
Smurf.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's good to be here. I'm glad we finally connected. I know this has kind of been unfolding over the past nearly a year to try to get down here and see you. So
yeah, it's been great. So it's a quick recap. 9 years in the Navy.
Yes, sir.
And you medically retired out in 2018 after some crazy experiences happens, which we'll dive into deeply.
Yeah, some crazy experiences leading to that, and then some even more crazy experiences after. So I guess have lots of exciting things to look forward to today.
The story goes on. The story continues.
That's
For
great.
sure.
Well, let's rewind all the way back to the beginning when you joined the military to attend OCS.
Yeah. Yes.
And you joined because, was it family or what kind of got you interested in the military?
So, growing up, I was largely raised by sort of unconventional hippie type folks. My mom was an obstetrician gynecologist, or a vagina whisperer, as I like to call her. My dad, he's like just sort of, this kind of dude that always, he would never buy any clothes. So he was always like patching together his old stuff, living off the grid. He carves his own bows. He goes out into the woods, makes a freaking snow cave and sleeps in it and wakes up and hunts deer. He's just like a wild man.
Sounds like a real man.
Doesn't really fit
That's
into
a
modern
real man.
society.
Yeah.
But they were never, really into supporting the military when I was growing up. That they were against it, but my dad hadn't been drafted in the Vietnam War. I had an uncle who was a Marine, but most of my family was not, had much affiliation with the military at that point. And, I wasn't even allowed to play violent video games. I couldn't have G.I. Joes.
Yeah.
So it all kind of backfired on my folks. But I ended up going to college. There's a little aviation school at the community college where I grew up. As I came out of high school, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, but I always had an interest in aviation. I got to go up in a little Cessna when I was a kid, and I loved it.
Yeah.
And so when I came out of high school, I was like, all right, I'll try that. And ended up enrolling there, did pretty well, ended up becoming a flight instructor by the time I was a junior in college.
Okay.
While I finished up my 4-year degree through a satellite program, I was flight instructing. And by the time I was graduated, I had a student, actually, an older gentleman, just super brilliant dude that ran his own privacy research and consulting firm and think tank. And he ended up inviting me and said, hey, would you like to work for my company? I need somebody to fly me around. And I was like, absolutely.
Hell yeah.
So we basically were looking around. I helped him pick out an aircraft. We went down to the Mooney factory here in Texas. I actually picked up a brand new Mooney Acclaim, fully decked out. And then I spent a year flying around the country, a lot of single pilot time as well as instructing with him.
Okay.
Got a pretty good glimpse into the world of corporate America. He worked a lot with a lot of tech companies. And so it was a good gig. It paid well, especially at the time. It was right when the stock market crashed. A lot of the guys that I was flight instructors with were all scrambling to make, $17,000 a year, trying to get into the regional airlines, all shacking up together in some crappy apartment. It was a rough time to come out of college and try to be getting into that industry. So I was very fortunate to have that position. But after a year of it, I still kind of wanted more in my life. While it was very cushy and I learned a lot, and I got to be a fly on the wall in some very interesting meetings in the tech world, it just kind of wasn't, I wasn't feeling terribly passionate about it. Yeah. And I had a friend, Mark, who was applying to the Navy to be a pilot. And at the time I was like, don't you have to go to the Naval Academy? Doesn't your dad have to be an admiral? And so I started researching, and I found this website called Air Warriors. It's still out there, and it's a great resource for anybody who's potentially looking at a career in military aviation. And I dug around on there for a while. And at first I actually wanted to go to the Coast Guard. I had read a book called The Last Run, which is all about these wild Coast Guard rescues up in Alaska, which I know you've got a little experience with, or a lot of experience with.
Yeah, done a couple of times.
But anyways, that kind of was drawn to that sort of rescue community at first, but it was going to be like a 6-month wait for the board. And so I was like, well, I'll apply Navy and see what happens. So, went through all the testing, did well with all my aviation flight experience at that point. It made for a pretty good package.
Yeah.
And I don't remember how long it took, but a couple months later I heard back and got picked up for a pilot slot.
Oh, man.
And so I was exciting.
Do you think large in part that had to do with you already having your prop license?
You absolutely do not need it.
You don't need it, but do you think that...
I think it was helpful.
Yeah.
And again, the needs of the military fluctuate pretty drastically over time. And so at the time, I think it was, middle of the road. They were taking a fair amount of people. It wasn't super exclusive. I think that kind of helped accelerate me into that position. But you can go in, you can be a freaking basket weaving major.
Yeah.
And if you score decent on the test, that you have to take this aptitude test ahead of time.
Yeah.
And that's really what they look at. They look at your, your college history, make sure you didn't,
Flunk
just
out of classes
goof around the whole time you're in college or whatever. But if you have decent grades and you do okay on that test and you have a 4-year degree, that's really all you need.
Yeah. And I think it helps set you up for success going through training as well, right? If you have a basic understanding of flight rules and characteristics.
There were certainly some advantages, but there were also the disadvantages of already being set in my own ways that became actually a struggle for me during parts of training.
Breaking bad habits.
You have to break those habits to reform the habits that they want you to have.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even call them bad habits. Like, I just knew how to do certain things already, but they want to reteach you, and relearning how to do things somebody else's way at times is very challenging.
What's an example of that?
So once I got into flight school, I already had like the very basic like stick and rudder skills. I was already an instrument pilot, so I was comfortable with a lot of that. But as I got into a lot of the procedural stuff, it was like they really want you to do things a certain way. And there's also one of the biggest challenges was you would sometimes get these instructors that sort of had like an inferiority complex with you. Like, here's this brand new ensign and he knows he's a better pilot than I am. He's a better stick. Like, I remember flying with several guys and they'd be flying, in the instrument in the clouds, and they'd be going all over and altitudes kind of shifting in the aircraft while they would hand me the controls and it would just be like stable. So there was a little bit of anger towards me because I was a good pilot, like a good stick and rudder pilot. Not saying I, knew anything about the world of tactical aviation at that point, but so there's a little bit of that created an abrasive attitude towards some of the instructor staff.
Sure. A little resentment.
Yeah.
So how long does that training look like while you're going through that? And what's the steps, right? Because usually you do single prop and then you move on. You've already done that. So like, what did that kind of flow look like for you?
So I went to OCS in Newport, Rhode Island for about 3 months. Graduated there after, standard boot camp kind of stuff, running around getting yelled at by Marine drill instructors. I really kind of enjoyed it because you see, I don't know if you guys are the same in this. It sounds kind of common with military guys, but you see other people kind of like freaking out and struggling with things that are really not that bad, and it kind of like lifts your spirit a little bit.
I think that's the best medicine is when people suck harder than you do.
And not that I want to see them struggle, but at the same time, you're kind of like,
we talk about that all the time, on the runs, the ruck runs and everything, where you're just like, I am dying right now. And then you look to your left or right and they're just on the side throwing up and you're like, okay, I could do this.
At least I'm not that guy.
Gives you a little spark, like a little, But anyways, got through that fairly unscathed. Ended up going to Pensacola, Florida to do aviation pre-flight indoctrination, or API, which is basically a month of ground school. You learn a lot of aviation basics, weather, navigation. You do a little bit of survival training. You get to swim a mile in your flight suit, which was another one of those things you see people like really struggling with. And you go, God, this isn't that bad. I was very comfortable in the water. I grew up largely up in northern Michigan, where I was in the lakes a lot. I did a lot of like kiteboarding. I'd been drug around by these old school original kites that didn't have any safety features back then. And so I was very comfortable, like nearly drowning, which actually became a very useful skill. And I'll get into in the story a little later. But I really enjoyed all that kind of training. I like the harder stuff. I like the hands-on training, the practical experience training. We did the helo dunker, dump you upside down. I'm sure you guys probably had to do that thing. Blindfold you. You got to get out, and you're in a lit pool, so it's not terrible, but you can imagine how awful it would be to be in the dark in the real chaos of something like that happening. And how awful that would be. But made it through that stuff, no problem. And then ended up going to VT-28, which is in Corpus Christi, Texas, with the Rangers. So not far from here. Actually, we'd come up to San Antonio to escape, in Austin to get out of Corpus at times. But I flew the T-34 Charlie Turbo Mentor, which is actually a pretty high performance. It's a single engine turbine prop aircraft, fully aerobatic, complex aircraft with retractable gear and flaps. So as far as a baseline aircraft to be jumping into for your first aircraft, really, it's like, that's on the upper side of general aviation training.
That's Porsche level. Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun, a lot of academic hazing and you get to start to learn the dynamics with these different instructors, and they try to be as objective as possible with the grading, but a lot of the times it becomes more of who your instructor is can make just as big a difference. So you can have the best flight of your life, the best event of your life that you've prepared the most for, and you can get a poopy pants instructor that you don't vibe with, and you can have a bad day.
That just reminds me of Ranger School. I was a squad leader at the time, weapons squad leader, and this captain was grading an E6 position. And I was like making the weapon systems talk, and I was like, this felt good to me. This is a win. And he came up and it was like, that was shit. Just because he had like a stigma against bat boys, going through the program.
There was definitely that aspect of the training. And you could also have kind of a rough day and not do your best, but you got a Santa Claus instructor who just gives you great grades. So you win some, you lose some. But my previous flight instruction or experience really helped with that phase with the stick and rudder portion. There's still a massive amount of rote memorization and procedural knowledge that I just had to digest and regurgitate. I basically had like 2 weeks off before starting, before I was going to actually have my first flight. And in that time, a lot of other guys were just like going out having a good time. And I did some of that, don't get me wrong. But I also took that 2 weeks that we had this little break in training, and I just freaking crammed everything. I memorized all the emergency procedures, all the SOP. I knew everything that I possibly could fit in every day. I spent the majority of my time doing that in training. And when I showed up for my first flight, I ended up with like the grumpiest instructor there. Everybody's like, oh, that guy.
Good luck.
Oh, no.
And, I just went in and he already had a rough attitude. But as we got into the brief, I started regurgitating all this stuff that you normally don't have to know until a couple months in. And he's like, okay.
Yeah. Did your preparation.
You passed. Yeah. And there was a little bit of respect. He still had like this intense attitude, but that definitely helped my over preparedness. I've always kind of been the opposite of a procrastinator, for better or worse at times. But it seemed to help in naval training for sure. Anyways, I did about 6 months there, a little over 6 months. Got to do, everything from basic flight procedures, emergency procedures, systems knowledge, instrument flying. And then you get into aerobatics, and some more fun stuff along the way. and ended up graduating out of there towards the top of my class. I think I was second in my class. There's another dude who was just like a super nerd genius, even more prepared than I was. But I got to put down my choice of tail hook. Out of there, you can choose the tail hook pipeline. You can choose helicopters. I think there's even a few people that go to the E9, which is like the doomsday communication aircraft.
Yeah.
A few guys picked that, and then the P3 at that time, which is now the P8, like a patrol plane.
Yeah.
But I did well enough that I was able to put down tail hook as long as you're in the top 50% of your class. Or I can't remember if it's the top 50% of your class or like a certain score that you have to have.
Sure.
But ended up putting down tail hook. And again, you can put down tail hook, and needs of the Navy, they can be like, sorry, everybody's P3s this week or whatever. But fortunately that week, got a tail hook slot. And so I headed to Kingsville, Texas, again, not too far from here. And I joined VT-22, and I started flying the T-45 Charlie Goshawk, which is affectionately known as the clown jet. It's a pretty high performance little single engine jet.
Okay.
And they paint it orange and white, so it looks like a clown.
Oh.
And, having a bunch of guys that are new to jets flying around in these things, it can be a clown show for sure.
Yeah.
Which is probably why they put us out in Kingsville, Texas.
And what's the purpose of flying this?
So, it's to continually, learn the basics in the T-34, and now the T-6 Texans, what they use.
So it's still training at this
still
point.
training, and it's just gradually getting you acclimated to operating at a faster pace and operating a more complex, more capable aircraft.
Yeah.
And just sort of slowly building that. So,
And how did that feel, getting behind?
I was very comfortable in the T-45. Again, my previous aviation experience, I had gotten to do a little bit of flying in jets already in the civilian world. So it was very comfortable for me. And again, that first part of intermediate training in the Goshawk, I still felt I had a pretty good advantage with my previous flight experience.
Sure.
So I really felt very comfortable, and my performance really helped me in my ability to fly that aircraft and be comfortable and stay ahead of the aircraft. A lot of guys get into the Goshawk, and it's a real challenge because things happen much quicker, and it's much easier to screw up and get way behind the jet and get confused. And, I hear people go up on their first flight or whatever, and they end up like departing the aircraft, or just all this clown show kind of stuff happens. But at that point, my previous experience and my preparation had me feeling very comfortable. And as I went through intermediate training over the course of that 6 months or so, I ended up having really good grades. And I got to selection there. And that's where you choose. Are you going to go fly the E-2C2, which is the surveillance aircraft that operates off of the aircraft carrier, or the C2, which is the onboard carrier delivery. So they fly, mail and people to and from the shore. And you could also, at that time, I think you could still select prowlers, which are like these big electronic attack aircraft. And now they've transitioned over to the Growler, which is basically a Super Hornet, but with electronic attack equipment on it, vice bombs and missiles.
Okay.
But I wanted to fly the fighters. So that's what I said at selection. And you go into this whole interview, one, it's based off of your grades, but probably an even bigger component is how that interview and your personality. They really want somebody who understands that you are really dedicating yourself to this fully, because you have to basically committing your life to this, and that's all you do.
It's not a job.
Like you get to put away all your hobbies. You got to put your family second if you have a family. So they really want to make sure that you're in that mindset before you go into it.
Constantly learning. It's just 100% pure training environment.
Yeah, and it's just the whole way through. Even as you get more advanced in your career in that strike fighter community, you're just constantly getting more and more qualifications. You're constantly all the tactics are constantly changing.
Yeah.
It's just a constant barrage of information that you have to be able to deal with. And in the Super Hornet and Hornet communities, it's sort of this jack of all trades, master of none. A lot of communities, like for example, in the Air Force, if you're a fighter, pilot, you typically have sort of an area of expertise where you really focus on electronic attack, or you really focus on strike, or you really focus on just the fighter side of it. But in the Super Hornet, you got to kind of know a little bit about everything.
Sure.
Can you describe the F-18?
So the F-18, the Super Hornet, the Hornets have kind of been phased out as the legacy Hornets. We're now just flying the E's and F's, the Super Hornets. It's a single or two-place cockpit aircraft, two-engine, gray pointy wings. It's got very cool look to it. It's a Generation 4 fighter. So designed back in the 90s. It's got a radar, it's got a gun, and it's capable of putting all sorts of air-to-air and air-to-ground weapons on it. And it's also carrier-borne, so it's got robust landing gear system, a tail hook for landing on the cable, catching a cable, and a nose launch bar system, so it can be launched off the carrier. So kind of you're all around. In the world of fighter aviation, we kind of jokingly call it the fat kid, because compared to some fighters out there, it's not the most speedy and agile, but it's still a fighter jet. And
Quite
it's
capable.
Pretty damn capable.
Yeah.
It's got 44,000 pounds in afterburner with both those engines ripping, so it can get around. You know? It's maybe not the most elite of the fighters or the best of the bombers, but it's kind of a little bit of everything, which keeps it real interesting for you as a pilot.
And it's held up to date. I mean, even our new gen aircraft aren't. they're posing
F-35.
They're posing a lot of issues, right? I mean, the 22 and 35, they've got their own respective issues that are.
Yeah, I mean, these Gen 5 aircraft now that we're on to, they're just so complex. And with that complexity comes great capability, but there also comes, the growing pains.
Yeah, nuanced error with it.
And, right before I joined the Navy, I had this brilliant professor in college. He was actually a former career Navy test pilot. He'd flown back in the Vietnam era. He was a Huey gunship pilot. He was with the Seawolves, which were like the first special operations helicopter unit, flying day or night into anything to, we drop you off, we pick you up. So he had seen just wild stuff. This guy's name's Mike Stock. He's still around. He's just a legend. He became a bush pilot, test pilot, like this dude has done. But he told me before I joined up, and he's like, he gave me a few basic rules. And one of them was, whatever you do, try not to fly the first variant of any aircraft. So
fair.
Guys that got into F-35, well, it's very cool and has some very cool capabilities. A lot of the guys that got into it early, they had to go through those growing pains and headaches.
Working out the kinks.
But the Super Hornet's been around now since the 90s. So a lot of those kinks, I mean, there's constantly kinks to work out and procedural changes and tactical changes. But it was pretty well established when I got into it.
It's incredible. So you're, and sorry to jump ahead. I just wanted to, talk about this aircraft, but now you're in this clown jet and it's the clown show.
Yeah.
And you're still kind of proving yourself in this world.
Yeah.
And at this point, there's still pilots that are struggling.
Oh, yeah. I mean, at the time I joined, when I got to aviation pre-flight indoctrination in Pensacola, was right after the stock market crash, basically. And the government made huge cuts. And so they realized, we've got way too many pilot candidates for the pilot slots we're going to have available. So from basically day one in API, they were cutting hard. The pressure, I mean, API is normally like this laid back thing where you can just get 80% and pass the test and be fine. So most people use it as a drinking evolution around Pensacola Beach. And it very quickly became not that while I was there, because they raised up the standard score that you had to get to pass. And a few classes after I had actually joined up and was going through this, you basically had to score in the 90s or above on every test. Wow. And so you couldn't screw up. But shortly after I had classed up, they got so desperate to cut people that they had this, I guess you could call it like nightmare Oprah scenario. They had everybody, all the students that are waiting in what's called A pool, waiting to class up, come in every morning. You had to wear your khakis and go into muster in this auditorium. Everybody sits down and they're like, all right, look underneath your seat. And anybody with a pink envelope under they're like, all right, go ahead and open it up. And it was like sorry, goodbye. See you later.
Damn.
What a terrible way to present that. Too. Like so military.
And I think there are a few people that are happy, like guys that went to the Naval Academy that had already done 4 years of that, and kind of like, well, there were guys like that were getting out with a free education basically, and like, all right, cool, I'm going to go on with my life. But there were also a lot of dreams that were crushed.
Oh, sure.
through that.
I bet.
Would you call it Doomsday Oprah?
Yeah, like Nightmare Oprah, Doomsday Oprah.
You get cut. You get cut.
Yeah.
You get cut.
Like you think you're getting a prize. Like I can only imagine the first time of that. Just like, ooh, pink envelope.
yeah.
What is this?
I heard
Welcome to the military.
I heard the leadership that executed that plan actually got some flack for doing it that
I'm
way.
sure
But,
they did.
I mean, they were desperate, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, even just in that first API phase, I mean, OCS, there were quite a few people cut, and then you get to API, and that was like, people were dropping like flies from that. And then especially on the navigation test, because it was actually kind of difficult. You're doing all this old school navigation. You're using these little whiz wheel E6B flight computer things. You gotta, and so people really struggled with that. But made it through all that, made it through primary. And then now I made it to intermediate in the Goshawk and went to the selection board. And I actually went to my board with my best friend that I'd gone to OCS with. We were roommates, and we went to the same board together. And basically there was one jet slot and one E2 slot. And so we didn't really know what was going to happen. And it basically came down to that personality board and who's going to be the personality fit for that community. And my roommate, he's an awesome dude. I think they perceived that he was maybe not quite as dedicated to that world and the studying that I was. And so they ended up picking me for the jet slot, which was great, but also kind of a crappy feeling. Like, then I went back to my roommate who's, his dreams were just burst. He ended up going on to have just an amazing career and crushing it in that world, flying E2s. But, it was kind of a tough moment for him, for sure.
That's bittersweet, for sure.
Yeah, but ended up selecting at that point. I knew I was going to go fly some variant of the F-18. I didn't know if it was going to be the Charlie, the E, the F, or potentially the Growler. And then, as much as I kind of felt I breezed through a lot of intermediate training, as soon as I got to advanced, it was like a whole different world. I think the instructor staff knew that I kind of found that section fairly easy and didn't really have any big struggles. And so they ended up making my on-wing this Marine callsign Fat, who was like the most brutal instructor there. He was just known for just failing everybody on everything they did and just being extremely harsh. And while it was very miserable at the time, it also upped my game that prepared me down the road. So in a way, I was thankful that I had that sort of brutal advanced training for months of that.
Sure.
Because I came out the other side and I went to the RAG. After I winged and graduated, I was selected for the Super Hornet and headed to VFA 106 Gladiators in Virginia Beach out of NAS Oceana. And when I showed up there, I think there were a lot of people who were not used to the standards of what fighter aviation is. And Fat had just like beaten that into me. Like, everything from the presentation of your briefing room when you walk in, making sure you've emptied the garbage that's in the room, making sure the briefing board looks like a freaking robot wrote it up there. Yeah. And just,
rulers and protractors everywhere.
And
right?
like just my regurgitation of knowledge, like knowing it verbatim and being able to just bam, 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 instead of being the guy who kind of stumbles through it in his own words. And so I already had that baseline going in, which was hugely beneficial.
Oh yeah.
And when I got to the RAG at 106, there were guys that didn't have that really, it was a kick in the nuts for them.
Yeah.
In the briefs, especially.
So it's a good thing that you had, yourself kicked in a little bit during training, right?
Yeah. While that, you know how it goes. Like you get this brutal training and it's unpleasant, but then you maybe later appreciate that for sure.
On the back end, you get a different perspective.
That's an interesting one too, because a lot of the older school people are those who've been there longer always think they know best, but technically the newer school programs are the ones that are going to teach you how to hit the standard of today.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some pros to that for sure.
Yeah.
And it definitely helped me going into the RAG because going into the strike fighter world, I mean, the standards are very high.
Oh yeah.
And at the time, the sort of leadership's guidance at the reg at that time, one, they're still like, they're trying to cut a lot of people. And we've already been through several filters to get to this point, but they're still like, we don't need you. So I think a lot of guys get their wings on their chest and get there and they're like, I'm a winged aviator. And now I got this.
Good to go. Yeah. Time to put my feet
up.
You
show up and you realize you just got an entry pass. That's all you got at this point.
Yeah. You're barely starting.
Now the true work begins.
And I mean, you show up and you spend 2 weeks just doing all this computer training, like nonstop, just sitting at a computer for 8 to 12 hours a day, just getting a freaking fire hose of information blasted into your face. And then you jump into simulators and it's, systems knowledge, procedural knowledge, emergencies, and got through that stuff through the transition phase where you're just kind of learning the basics of the jet navigation. You do some instrument flying, some low levels, a lot of emergency procedure hazing where they just throw everything at you. But you come out of that and you're NATOPS qualified. So it means you're sort of a beginner in the jet. You're at least safe enough to go fly this thing. You do a solo. And the first time flying the Super Hornet was one of the coolest experiences. Like,
I can imagine.
I mean, even just walking into the hangar the first day at 106 and seeing these things that I had like dreamed of as a kid and never thought like, my nerdy little ass was going to ever have a chance to do. But here I am, and here's these freaking magnificent machines. It was so surreal. And like putting on your G suit and your harness and your helmet, and you're going out to this thing, and the whole thing, like, well, you're super nervous because like you've got very high standards and grades and everything.
Don't mess it up.
Every day, your career is hanging over your head, which takes away a little of the fun.
Of course. That's what the military does, though. They suck the fun out of everything.
It should be the most fun job ever, but no, you're constantly just getting kicked in the nuts. But you get those little glimpses of moments of how surreal it is.
That's what makes it more real, too. At the end of the day, when you're going back and reflecting on your life, that moment means so much to you. But all of that stress that was placed on you just locks it in so much more.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes it so much worth it. Like, everybody else would do this. But here I am, getting behind this as a childhood dream, successfully accomplishing that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. It's tough and demanding, but so rewarding. For sure.
So you're looking at this beast, which are way bigger in person than they look like on everything else.
So big.
Oh, yeah. You're like, that's just a little fighter jet. You see like the Blue Angels fly over.
It's the size of a human, except a little bigger, right?
And then you walk up and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
I know.
30 feet tall.
And
like 50 feet long.
Yeah.
And climbing up into the cockpit and getting out on my first flight, you take the runway and you put that thing into full afterburner on takeoff, and you can feel that 44,000 pounds of thrust just shoot off behind you and pushes you back in your seat. And before you know it, you're up in the air and the gear are up and the flaps are up and you're like 10 miles behind the jet. Just like, whoa.
Like, oh shit.
But pushed through that transition training, ended up going to the strike training you do first, which is learning all the, air to ground bombing procedures, close air support. That kind of ends with a detachment out to El Centro, California, where you do a couple weeks out in the desert at the bombing ranges there, doing some very cool training.
Yeah.
A lot of close air support. You get to do some like high threat cast scenarios. Very cool. And at this point, any advantage I had from my previous flight experience was gone, which, made this sort of part of the training kind of a kick in the nuts, because through a lot of the earlier training, I was able to kind of rely on my previous experience. But as I got into advanced in the T-45 and then now at the RAG and in the Super Hornet, like whatever advantage I had initially, it was a level playing field at this point.
Yeah.
So I was just holding on for dear life, just trying to make it through.
Yeah.
But just kept grinding. I had my fair share of struggles going through. Occasionally I'd get it's called a signal of difficulty. They give you a pink slip, which is like, hey, you kind of sucked on this flight. We're going to give you another chance.
Rang back some Doomsday Oprah.
Yeah. And you don't get too many of those before it's like, see you later, But,
what are some of like the tangible struggles that you were facing?
For me, I was strong on the knowledge. I could prepare. I could, learn a lot of information and regurgitate that in a brief. But then to take these very advanced tactics that you're reading, well, you're basically going out of several different publications and you're trying to take bits and pieces of all this different information and put it all together in something you've never done. So it would be like trying to learn how to play rugby, for example. And you've never played rugby before. You've got like 10 different publications that explain the rules of rugby and the athleticism of rugby and how many shoelaces and how to tie your shoe and what the shoes are made of and all the gear. And you put all that together and you go out on the field, but you don't know how to freaking play rugby yet. Yeah. And so for me, the biggest struggle was taking all this information and then executing it.
It's practical application of written knowledge.
Yeah.
That's a big one. And I think that for our audience, we could say any board game that you've ever learned and you read the manual and then you go to play it.
Right.
And you're like, I have no idea what to do.
Right.
But it's also real life. You are going to jail. No $200 for you. Like, hold on. There's consequences here.
And what is the worth of a Super Hornet?
So in 2014, the value of a Lot 27 F-18 Echo Super Hornet was $89 million.
So that's a big responsibility.
Adjusted for inflation today, that's like $106-ish million.
Manageable.
And at the current rate of inflation, that'll be like $400 million in a few weeks.
A couple weeks.
Next week. So it's a big responsibility.
Sure,
but that for me, that was and I think that's where most guys, that's the biggest hurdle, is taking all this information and getting into something new. And every day, basically, you're doing something you've never done.
Yeah.
And having such high standards. And then again, the instructor piece plays in. You have some instructors that are very good at like getting the best out of you so that you learn, but you also have a lot of instructors, especially at this time. There was one of the training officers at the squadron had put together this white paper. And, it wasn't exactly saying this, but in short, it was saying millennials are sort of a bunch of spoiled brats that are coming into this training and they're, sort of entitled. So we need to deal with them differently. Yeah. And so there was this sort of like heavy-handed, and it was really funny because you'd see these instructors walking around being like, fucking millennials. And I was older than a lot of the instructors and they were millennials too. So there was kind of those moments of silent comedy I enjoyed to myself, but
I'm sure.
There was this mentality towards the instructor, or there was at least a cadre of the instructors that sort of had this attitude towards the students at that time that, you're just a bunch of freaking entitled millennials, which
we say
nobody in my class was like that. Like we were all there to earn our spot. And
to be fair, we say that about every generation that's younger than us, right?
Yeah.
Because, and God help us for Generation Z, who's going to become pilots now, right? We can say the same thing.
You were in the last hard Ranger school, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, back when it was hard.
Yeah, you were
Ranger
in the last
assessment.
You were in the last hard one, right? That's what everyone says. I was in the last hard Buds class. I was in the last hard selection. You don't know how it was.
Yeah, and my thing is like, technology changes so drastically.
Yeah.
And if you look at history, you remember how they cleared, CQB in Vietnam? These guys are like hip firing their weapons, like back when it's hard,
waltzing in,
low carrying gear on, it's no vest or anything. You need to have that structure in place. So like the generations, bring value to that as well.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, for sure. And in the world of strike fighter aviation, you look back and see like what the World War II pilots were doing in the Vietnam era, like. It was the wild frickin' West.
Yeah.
You finished basically the equivalent of what was our advanced training in the T-45. You put on wings. They were flying different aircraft back then, like A4s, but you went from that and you jumped right into a squadron and you were deployed.
In Vietnam,
getting shot from the air and the ground in chaos.
Yeah.
And guys died way more frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there was certainly there were things in that era that were, just Wild West and more difficult. But there's also, we've evolved the tactics so much that I think a lot of the tactics have become more complex and the technology is more complex. So, both have their challenges for sure. And I think when I was going through the challenges, the Super Hornet had become so capable of so many mission sets, and each one of those was evolving so quickly that it was just information overload.
Yeah.
And so working your way and dealing with the closest alligator to the canoe essentially became like an art form that you had to get very good at very quickly.
Adaptability and just reaction time
For sure.
had to be intense as well.
And just, the learning curve was steep and you had to be a quick learner. And you also had to be able to, if you did screw up, you had to be able to brush it off and get back at it.
Yeah.
And you were lucky if you were to get a couple second chances, but no one was going to wait out for you for very long. So
Sure. If you find yourself being more proficient or less proficient at certain activities, I guess, within the scope of your mission parameters, do they buckle you in somewhere where you're good at? If you're more proficient at communications or CAS, right? If you're doing close air support, but you're shit at electronic warfare or bombing, are they going to shuttle you more towards a CAS centric, or do you have to maintain standards across the board?
No, you really have to. You have to maintain a standard, and you're continuously going through different levels of the strike fighter weapon training syllabus.
Okay.
So you come out of the initial F-18 training, like where I was at 106, and you're a level 1 Swifty qual, which means you're basically safe enough not to kill yourself.
Yeah.
But then you got to do your combat, your level 2, your combat wingman. Then you're doing combat section lead. Then you're doing combat division lead. And then as you work your way through, you've got to become all these different levels, all the way up to you can be a commanding officer of a fighter squadron, and you're still doing these Swifty events.
Okay.
So you always are learning, and you have to know this wide range of mission sets and be capable. If you excel at one thing, like say you're really good at the boat, potentially you might end up with a specific qual to be like a landing signal officer, LSO, where you help other guys land on the boat, and you'll get specialties throughout, and you might have to be a subject matter expert in certain things, the SME for your squadron on a certain thing. But everybody still has to know the same massive amount of information. You don't really get to specialize.
Sure. That makes sense.
So what was the next portion? So we got into your first solo flight, and you're going through all this other training too. So what are you in the momentum of your training now? I mean, how is this? Is this ever changing? What is it looking like next for you, or is it just constant training and briefing?
So yeah, I mean, it's constant studying, constant training, constant briefing, constant regurgitation of new information, constantly struggling to learn something very quickly. And as soon as you get to where you're like, okay, I'm kind of getting the hang of that enough not to suck, then it's all right, time for the next training event. So you go through all these different versions of air to ground employment, from smart weapons to conventional weapons to CAS, high threat CAS, low level flying. And then as soon as you're decent at that, all right, guess what? Now it's the fighter phase. Now you got to learn how to fight the jet. You get into air combat maneuvering, or BFM, basic fighter maneuvering. So employing against other aircraft within visual range, which is freaking very high pace, very cool. Probably the epitome of what people think of when they think of fighter pilot is, you and this other dude tangling it up, the, knife fighting, a phone booth, dog fighting. Yeah.
My question is that I'm sure everybody is going to be thinking too is, in the movies we see these guys in aerial combat, with your weapon system, just tracing these guys down. It's got to be so hard to hit something.
Oh yeah,
at those speeds
while you're moving and they're moving.
Yeah. I mean, just being good at hitting stationary thing on the ground and air to ground employment, which is probably why you do the strike phase first. Is like, all right, first learn how to hit something that's not moving.
Yeah.
All right,
and
now
people
guess
miss
what?
all the time, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, and now you're going to be in the air, and it's going to be moving, and it's going to be trying to kill you, and they're probably better than you. So good luck.
Yeah, it's moving 3-dimensionally while you are too. Yeah,
it's part art form, part science, and I love that phase. The dynamic nature of it, the high intensity, the G-force. Being a shorter guy was beneficial for me. I was doing a lot of weight training back then, so I was good at pulling G's, and the easier you can deal with the physical stress of that environment, the more brain cells you have to utilize for what you're doing with the stick and rudder, operating your defensive systems and your weapon systems, and you have that much more bit of your brain to think with. Vice, just hold on for dear life.
So let's dive into that a little bit. Is these physical stresses that are being put on your body, what are some of the things that are going on as far as your reaction time, as far as your response time? as you increase in G's, like you're saying, like that brain is being pushed against the skull. You have less oxygen. So, like, did you drastically notice that difference?
Yeah, again, for me, I was very comfortable, doing a lot of CrossFit and weight training. You kind of get used to operating where you're breathing heavily. You're maybe a little hypoxic.
Yeah.
You're feeling these stresses through your body. So, for anybody interested in that world, I can't recommend CrossFit enough or Olympic lifting and things like that to train you for that.
Yeah.
The guys that, were struggling more, especially when we went to the centrifuge in El Centro, they put you in the thing and spin you around like an astronaut, and you get mushed. The guys that struggled were typically the taller or leaner guys that didn't have a lot of leg and core strength.
Yeah.
And also just being taller, it makes it more difficult because you have a longer distance between your heart and your brain, and that much more distance for your heart to force the blood up, which just naturally makes it more difficult for you. So I felt I had a smidge of an advantage there, but still, being comfortable with that and then being able to think, and, it's like being in a wrestling match, trying to play the jazz piano, driving in traffic, texting on your phone with screaming kids in the back. There's a lot going on, in that environment, but I absolutely loved it. And because I had such a passion for that phase, I really dove into it. And in that phase, actually, it was, in a way, some of it was easier to learn because they actually had this video series that they had put together.
Top Gun.
It was done by a Top Gun. Yeah. So you sit in a skiff and you put on the original Top Gun and you just listen to Danger Zone for 12 hours a day. And then you get in the jet and it's like, magic.
Is that SEER school for you guys? It's just
SEER school.
It's just Top Gun on repeat, 24 hours a day for a week.
I love SEER school. There are people, again, maybe because I love seeing other people having a rough day.
Yeah, SEER school is great.
It was some of the coolest training, I thought. And I feel at least the version that we got there was maybe a little bit easier than what they might give the SF guys. I think we get the PG-13 version.
Yeah.
Which I was a little disappointed about. Anyway,
no broken fingers.
No broken fingers.
Don't break a single bone.
I think we had a few concussions,
broken.
but that was the worst that happened.
That was always the rumor. Ankles. They could break up to one bone. They're not going to break any bone. They would tell that to all the students.
Slaps.
Yeah, they would tell that to all the students. Yeah, they could break up to one bone. No, they're not going to destroy your body.
They got a lot of money in you at that point in time.
You're $1 million asset. They're not going to break you.
I swear by it. I'm like, they broke my finger.
Yeah, I did a pinky finger.
You have to spread that knowledge. You spread that.
Yeah, you got to instill the fear.
Keep them wide-eyed.
It was way harder in my day, though. I don't know if they do it anymore.
I was in the last hard SEER school. Broke my little finger.
Yeah, I mean, I won't get. I guess we can't really get into all that stuff, but I wish we could because it's funny.
It is funny.
I think we're all out of our NDA phase now, huh?
Yeah. Camping with activities. You see a lot of people who have never been camping that are just like, oh, it's cold and
so
wet,
hard.
and we're camping outdoors.
5 days. Yeah.
I don't have a microwave in it.
It's something we talk to our team about all the time. It's just some guys, no one's shooting at you. Just solve the problem.
Yeah.
You got plenty of time in your cozy little house to come up with a solution.
And I mean, I enjoyed a lot of the captivity phases too. It was kind of fun.
Resistance phase. Yeah.
I wish that they kind of took the gloves off a little more and again, I guess
I can't
talk about Fight Club, but
I got smacked pretty hard. He smacked me over the ear by accident. He was trying to slap me in the face. He slapped me in the ear, so my equilibrium just went out the door, and I dropped to the ground. He broke character right away. He's like, "Oh shit, are you okay? I didn't mean to hit you in the ear."
T for timeout.
Yeah, he stood me up and shook me off. He's like, "You all right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." I'm like, all right, back to scenario.
Back to scenario.
Yes, that again. Yeah.
Yeah. So, during this time and all this training, what was it looking like for you with Afghanistan, with Iraq, all the happenings overseas?
Yeah, so it was a very exciting time to be getting through all that training because, I mean, a lot of guys that were coming back as instructors were coming back from active combat.
Yeah.
And while there wasn't a whole lot of air-to-air kind of combat going on, there was a ton of CAS.
Yeah.
A lot of guys with multiple employments in close air support scenarios, working with SF types, doing real work. So it was an exciting time. And so we all kind of knew that going through, like, we're actually going to do our real mission when we get through this. And ended up making it through there, ended up doing fighter phase. So the BFM and dogfighting. And then you get into air-to-air tactics, which are, 4-dimensional chess, at high speed. Yeah. So that stuff, at least for like the knowledge intake, was the extreme limits of my personal capabilities of what I can understand. And that part is extremely difficult with the tactics that you have to know. And the speed that it happens, and you're flying in formation and you're operating all these weapons. It's like the first time doing some of that, and I can't talk about in detail like what we do, but the first time doing some of that stuff's like, I can't believe we are doing this right now, and it's only going to get more crazy.
Oh yeah, helmet fire, like to say the least.
But and then at the end, the last phase you go through is CQ, carrier qualifications, which being able to land a jet aircraft on a moving aircraft in bad weather in the dark is the ultimate test of aviation skill, for sure. And while there's, all the fighter and CAS and all of that, there's definitely challenges with that. But the actual ability, to land on this moving thing in the dark with the weather throwing everything at you is like stupid. And that's probably, I think, to this day, to the best of my knowledge, we're still the only country that does night carrier ops. And going to that training, I mean, I saw guys that we had a lot of exchange pilots that came, and they were the best pilots from their country. And we had experienced guys from the Air Force that came, and they got, a few of them would get a chance to go to CQ. And I saw a lot of those guys disqualify at the boat, even with all the experience they had. So that phase, they ease up on the artificial stress a little bit, the instructors. And at that point, you've been there long enough that they don't have to haze you quite as hard.
Yeah.
There's definitely still some hazing, or personal development, whatever you want to call it. But they ease up a little bit on that artificial stress of the training, because they know that you're about to do basically the hardest thing you can do in a jet.
Oh, absolutely.
And you do a month of field carrier landing practice. So landing at the aircraft on the field using the ball, the Fresnel lens, which is basically this little amber optical lens that lights up, and there's a green datum line, and you're basically trying to keep that close to that datum to let you know that you're on this proper glide slope to come in and either not smash into the back of the aircraft carrier or completely miss the aircraft carrier and plunge into the ocean or miss all the wires and not land.
And then the boat goes right over you.
Yeah. There's for somebody, if somebody wants to get a really good appreciation for carrier operations, PBS did the show called Carrier. It's a docuseries. It's maybe a 10 or 12 series long, but I think it's episode 7 called Rites of Passage.
Okay.
And in that episode, they get into night carrier ops in adverse weather and like what it's like with the carrier bobbing around in the bad weather. And they do a really good job of giving people a glimpse into that world.
What's the length of the carrier, like the active runway?
I think the landing area is approximately 500 feet or so. And you're landing in about 250-ish feet.
Yeah, because you're not using the whole
How fast
length.
are you going at this time?
Depending on the weight of the aircraft, you're going around 160 miles per hour.
Yeah, while it's bobbing up and down. So that's the thing about ships is they roll laterally while they're bobbing up and down,
pitching,
and they're moving,
rolling, bobbing. You've got adverse weather that you're flying through. The air
so you're getting chop on your end. Yeah,
and then you got a guy driving that ship, a surface warfare officer who is probably extremely sleep deprived because they don't get crew rest like pilots do, and potentially dislikes you because you're a pilot and he's not. And so they're turning the frickin' ship all over the place. So you're coming down on a moving target that, if you're coming into an airport, you have this stationary localizer that you're flying in and an instrument approach. Well, imagine your localizers now. If the ship turns just a few degrees, depending on where you're at on that approach, now the whole freaking localizer just shifted a mile or two.
Yeah.
And by the way, you have some fairly antiquated technology that you're utilizing. I mean, the ACLS system is based off of Vietnam era fire controlled radar. So they've got this old school 70s radar that you're using for guidance. And if they move something in front of that on the deck of the carrier, now you've just lost that. And so,
oh man,
your instruments are unreliable. The ship is moving, it's bobbing, you're in bad weather. And oh, by the way, you've never done this before in the dark, and you're all by yourself. You don't have an instructor in the back with you.
Yeah.
So, there's a very robust training syllabus going into it. You do a lot of procedural stuff in the simulator with the emergencies and the procedures of flying these big carrier approaches and all the sort of procedures that go into that, which are complex in themselves. Mm-hmm. But the true test is that last 15 to 18 seconds when you break out in the dark and you maybe get a glimpse of that little amber ball and what happens in that last little bit before you touch down.
Yeah.
You can go from this perfect approach. You can have the freaking boat moving on you and you can get back on localizer. And by the way, you have to be within a few seconds because you have aircraft landing ahead of you and after you.
Yeah.
And you can't be off of that time by more than a few seconds. Otherwise you throw off the whole conga line behind you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this timing component to that. And you can get all that just right. And then you can break out and, if it's bad weather, you might not see the ball until a little bit closer in. Yeah. And by the way, the thing's bobbing around. And right before you touch down, you can be, again, in the perfect position. And just a few seconds before you land, you get this burble of air coming off the tower of the carrier. And that hits you. And it's like the hand of God reaches out and smacks you randomly in any direction it feels. And so you can go from a nice on glide slope, slightly high on glide slope, or wherever you want to be right there, to all of a sudden you're low or you're way high. Mm-hmm. And essentially what you're trying to do to catch the target wire is fly your head through a 1 foot by 1 foot box on a moving target. And you don't get much wiggle room in either direction, where either you are dangerously low, getting a hook, a ramp strike potentially, or you're missing all the wires and going around, or even guys that land too long, you miss all that and you can just crash into the water in front of the ship. So
super low airspeed.
It's, nobody's intentionally trying to kill you, but for not having anybody trying to kill you, there's a lot of stuff that's trying to kill you.
Yeah. A lot of danger.
Even just walking out on the deck in the dark on the aircraft carrier. I mean, if you've ever been in the bottom of a cave and you hold your hand out in front of you because there's zero ambient light, that's the deck of an aircraft carrier out in the middle of the ocean on an overcast night. It is pitch black and you're walking around on the deck just trying to find your jet, and there's turning helicopter props and E2 props. And for not having anybody trying to kill you, it's probably the most dangerous environment that you can be in. And hats off to the enlisted personnel that are working on that deck day in, day out, freaking sleep deprived and escaping death all day long, and probably getting paid less than you make at McDonald's once you put in how much time you're making.
For sure. Is there quite a bit of accidents that you've seen over the years? Yeah,
I mean, that's probably the most common place for there to be mishaps is around the aircraft carrier, especially at night. And it's not in the news, but it's a fairly frequent happening, and it's gotten a lot better over the years, but it still happens.
Yeah.
So you're going into that training knowing all this and trying to do it. In my first night at the carrier, I actually disqualified at the boat. I erred on the side of being a little too high, just kind of out of nerves, I think, and coming in like, I don't want to strike. I don't want to ramp strike. I don't want to die.
Yeah.
So just giving it just a millimeter too much a throttle at the wrong time, and the freaking missing the wires and going around. And I did it a couple times in a row. And before I knew it, I had to bingo profile back to Oceana at the Walk of Shame.
Oh, man.
I was fortunate to get a second chance. You don't always even get a second chance at that. But ended up coming back my second time in qualifying.
Okay.
And after that, I got picked up by VFA 143, the Pukin Dogs. They were just coming back from 2 back-to-back combat deployments, and they were, doing real stuff, a lot of casts out in the Middle East at that time. This would have been early 2013, middle of 2013 when I joined them. So we were just starting our next round of workups to get ready and go back and do that. So kind of an exciting time to be a new guy in a squadron.
Yeah.
And knowing that you're really going to go do real stuff.
Yeah, walk into a deployment.
And so, these guys are pretty salty coming back, and you get a massive amount of shit, as all the new guys do. But I was fortunate. We had an excellent squadron, and while there was a little bit of the new guy stuff, that it was largely tongue in cheek, and the guys were just having a good time with you. And I joined a great squadron, just full of good dudes like Barf.
Yeah.
And these guys were awesome. And I used the small mouth, big ears mentality going in as the FNG. In the pukin, my squadron's called the Pukin Dogs. And the new guy gets called Poop because you're the most worthless part of the dog. So instead of the last squadron just call you FNG or whatever, but we're called Poop because you're the first call sign you get.
And you have a guy named Barf at the Pukin Dogs. So
Oh yeah.
what's going on at the Navy?
Say the Navy. Just,
Our call
I used to
signs
think,
are always absurd.
before I had a conversation with Barf, like I thought it was like Top Gun. You're going to get all these cool names like Maverick,
Razor.
yes, Laser, Iceman. Like, come on.
No,
and he was like,
it's
nah,
not.
it's honestly the most embarrassing
Yeah.
thing that, that you've done. That's probably what they're going to give you a call
It's a
sign.
physical
Absolutely.
feature or an embarrassing act that you've done.
And if you
right?
hate it, it's going to stick that much harder.
Yeah, you'll never get rid of
Never
it.
get rid of it.
Yeah. Call signs are very big in the Air Force too, but yeah, some absolutely hilarious ones.
And everything's
can't even
gotta-
repeat them in public.
Everything, a lot of
sometimes.
them. Well, at least at that point, you had to have sort of a politically correct cover story for them
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, oh,
It
yeah.
couldn't be too vulgar.
Yeah.
For a while, it was kind of like Wild West, and you could name people whatever. But
Oh, yeah.
after a while, they're like, we can't put that on a jet.
Yeah.
My first exposure to one, and I still can't repeat it like on air, but it was an F-22 pilot I met when I was going through training. And he was an 05, so he's a lieutenant colonel. And it was in an air show in Albuquerque. And we were checking out the F-22s for the first time. Pilot introduces himself while I'm going through my initial gunner school. And he's an African-American gentleman with a call sign appropriate to like a slur. And he was like embracing of it. And I'm like, I don't know how to feel right now. Like, this is very awkward. And all the other pilots were like, oh, it's just his call sign. Like, this, you can't get away. You can't get
Just
away with
wrong.
this. Yeah, you can't get away with this anymore. Like,
Yeah.
That sounds about right. And
Yeah.
I think they've
Press the
eased some of
envelope.
them back a little bit.
so you just become Poop at the Pukin Dogs, which again, I can't get over these Navy call signs, but
Yeah, I'm the new Poop, and the first thing they gave me when I showed up to the squadron is a shot of warm well tequila with a pickle juice chaser.
Nice.
As the Pukin Dog drink. It's welcome to the squadron. Here we go. And I largely used the smallmouth, big ears mentality.
Yeah.
I studied hard. I was quiet. I did whatever was given to me as a job. No questions asked. Just knocked it out. And after 8 months of that, I hadn't really done anything dumb enough to earn a call sign.
okay.
Other guys that had joined the squadron at the same time, they already earned their call signs. Newer guys, there's maybe 4 or 5 newer guys after me at this point, nearly being there for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them already had all these call signs, and they had a big whiteboard with all these potential call signs. And my name had like 3, just like someone got bored and wrote something up there.
Yeah.
So I was proud of that. But this day, January 15th, 2014, I was getting ready to go out and do a mission with check an air-to-air refueling pod called an ARS pod that had just come out of maintenance. So I was going to do some aerial refueling.
Okay.
And then with the extra time and gas on the back end, I was going to break off with my commanding officer and go do some dogfighting.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And I was getting ready for this flight. It's January in Virginia Beach. It's frigid winter. We had this unseasonably cold winter for Virginia Beach. And getting ready for the brief, looking at the buoy temperatures out where we were going to utilize that day over the Atlantic Ocean in the working areas. The water temperature was 37 degrees Fahrenheit with below freezing air temps. And my buddy Fisty was at the SVO disc, and he's got a pretty funny call sign. His was because he was fairly new in the squadron, and they had a jet come out of maintenance that they just needed somebody to go fly quick to give it a quick check out. And so he basically got to go on just like a little joyride flight in the F-18. And we have a moving map in the Super Hornet, but it's not always updated with all the restricted areas and airspaces that are out there.
Okay.
But he kind of just took it for what it was and assumed that everything was good and showed everything. Ended up flying through an active restricted area where Marines were live firing a Stinger heat-seeking missile designed for shooting down other aircraft. And had his timing been just slightly off, he would have very likely been shot down by friendly forces. So he flew into Stinger territory.
Hey, that's a good one.
That is a good one.
That's a good one.
He's awesome, dude. I mean, he's like Chris Pratt, just this big ball of energy and happiness and comedy all the time. And as a joke that day, he's standing on the duty, answering the phone, running the radios, which the pilots all sort of rotated through day to day. But he had put up on the whiteboard the working areas, and then he had plotted using the Shark Tracker app that he had on his phone, all the position of these GPS tagged sharks. And right underneath my working area was a 16-foot great white shark, 3,500 pound beast named Mary Lee. And he's like, today would be a bad day to eject because there's this freaking massive white shark directly under your working area. So that was in the back of my mind, getting ready.
And it's freezing temps.
And then one of the more senior junior officers came up and he's like, hey, you haven't done anything stupid enough to earn a call sign yet today. So I was like double jinx going into this flight. And anyways, I guess we can get into this in the next episode, but this flight, some things do not go as planned.
Yeah, you might have ended up in the drink.
Yes.
Woo!
Or a great white's meal.
Yeah.
Which is equally as terrifying. I mean, but we'll jump into that on our next episode. So to our audience members, make sure to tune in next week.
Yes.
And we'll get into that incredible story.
Get into the good stuff.
Yeah, we'll dive into that.
Thanks for joining us today, Smurf.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. And make sure you guys are following along Medevac Podcast on our social media at Medevac Podcast, MEDEVAC.
We're starting to get a little bit more interactive with Medevac.
Yeah. Quite a bit more, actually.
Instagram, so make sure to follow our latest and greatest updates on everything there is to know.
Yeah, come talk to us on the live episodes as well. But anyways, tune in next week for Kegan's Part 2. Bye.
Looking forward to it.
Bye.